Hello, Tracy Daly here. Before we get stuck into chapter 24 of Checkmate, I just want to read an article from wirralglobe.co.uk because it's actually a friend of mine who's the artist, and you will remember him from Tracy's story. His name is Nigel Mottram, and he has a supernatural talent for people, for stories, and for bringing people out of really, really dark places. He has an equally amazing talent in art, and I'll let you see the pictures for yourself. You can find them anywhere you type in Nigel Mottram online, literally anywhere. He's absolutely awesome, and I'm lucky enough to have 2 of his paintings in my house. So that's absolutely brilliant. Go and check it out. So the article, wirralglobe.co.uk. An exhibition celebrating the works of Wirral artist Nigel Patrick Mottram will be on view at Burn Avenue, Baths next month. The Coming Home exhibition, on display from Sunday, April the 2nd till Sunday, April the 17th, will feature art from throughout Nigel's long career, including his colourful abstract paintings and his thought-provoking urban work. Born and raised in Birkenhead, Nigel, 80, used the baths many times as a child. A lot of this work was inspired by his upbringing in the town just after World War II, when he would explore the remains of local bomb sites. He found the textures and colours amidst the devastation fascinating. Nigel's passion for art started at a young age when he gained a place at the prestigious Laird School of Art. Shortly afterwards he emigrated with his family to Australia under the £10 a ticket scheme. There he had a variety of jobs, including working our kangaroo station. He moved back to London, where he gained a place at art school, continuing to develop his talent whilst also training as an art therapist. During a 25-year career in the NHS, he supported many young people using art to help them overcome trauma. When he retired, he took a studio in Ancoats, Manchester, where he was finally able to paint full-time. In June 2022, Nigel came home to the Wirral when he moved into Derwent Lodge Nursing Home in New Ferry. With their support and with the aid of using art for therapeutic purposes, Nigel once more again found the passion and zest for life. The next step seemed clear to the team at Derwent Lodge, and that was to share Nigel's art once again, and the dream of an exhibition was formed. Julie Wood, Derwent Lodge's activity coordinator, said, "When we learnt about Nigel's art career, we thought it was important that people got the opportunity to see his paintings once more. As he grew up in the area, the idea came to us to work with our friends at Burn Avenue, Baths to put an exhibition there." Described often as unique, the art exhibition is one of many events being held this year as Burn Avenue, Baths celebrates its 90th anniversary. So firstly, go down there, check it out. It's absolutely awesome. I've been sent pictures. I'm over 200 plus miles away. I'm not probably going to be able to get there this time, but I have been sent pictures. I've been sent a video. There's people I know that have been round, and it's absolutely awe-inspiring. Go and have a nose. Also, I am lucky enough, I'm going to use the word lucky here, because in this instance it applies more than anything else. I am lucky enough to have been one of those children supported through trauma by Nigel Mottram. In fact, Nigel went off-site with me to my mother's grave and was a perfect gentleman. It was a really useful experience for me to sit by my mother's grave with Nigel, feel safe, secure and supported, and to have the support of not just him as a person, but an incredible art therapist, an incredible therapist in general. So there's something that will always stay with me. Back when foster carers and social workers were saying I shouldn't go and it was bad for me, and there were certain people in my life causing me problems, as well as myself, I was going through a hell of a lot. This guy was a solid all the way through, and even as an adult, I got back in touch with him a couple of years ago now, maybe longer, it must be about 5-6 years ago now. I got back in touch. I was like, hey, how you doing? By the way, just let you know I've written this. The guy was like, hey, awesome, let's meet up. So yeah, he's a champion among champions. Go and check him out. He really deserves all the credit, and I have to speak to him again soon. In fact, I need to call him very, very shortly, because I said I was going to call him a couple of nights ago and life happened, and here we are. But yeah, an amazing inspiration. If you can get the opportunity to chat to him. He has a story for every single situation. Ask him about the sheep down on the farms. Ask him about the cat down in the grounds that he used to paint and used to draw. Ask him about the forklift truck that he drove and how an incident may or may not have occurred involving a forklift truck. He has a story for absolutely every situation. One of mine was, he taught me, even as an adult, the gift of generosity. And we sat there down outside a pub one time, and this fella comes over. I mentioned this in a previous cast. This fella comes over and he says, "Big issue, please, mate. Big issue." He's a homeless fella, or he's making out he's homeless, or he's working for the big issue, which I have no problem with. I've been homeless a couple of times. I've never gone that route myself. But straight away I was like, middle of London, loads of busy people, I'm not pulling money out, no thanks mate, not interested. And he said, "Oh, but I'm just talking, and I said, "No thanks mate, not interested, don't want to know, right, goodbye." And Nigel put his hand in his pocket and he went, "Come here mate." And the guy come over and Nigel put some money on the side and he said, "There you go." And he took this big issue and he looked at it and he said, "Thank you." He said, "I'll have a look at that in a bit." He said, "It looks really good." He said, "Thank you mate, good luck, yeah, have a nice day." And the guy went off with his pound or 50p or whatever it was. And I looked at Nigel and he smiled, he looked at me and I thought, don't know if he did that intentionally or not, but I did know he did it for him. And it just made me realise that not everybody is on the take, and everyone lives their life differently, but this guy's a special place in his heart for people. Maybe that's part of what made him an amazing therapist. It's definitely part of what made him an amazing person, and what makes him today an amazing person. Go check him out, he's awesome. Chapter 24. Checkmate. I awoke to Toby stood over me holding a coffee out at arm's length. How long he'd been there I didn't know. It was 6:45 AM according to the little gold plastic clock above the fireplace. I took it and thanked him, then I turfed it into a plant pot the second he'd left the room. I had trust issues at the best of times, even more so with people who I knew didn't like me. I saw how those pills had affected Megan, and there was no way I was trusting anything that I hadn't made myself. Megan was all smiles when she woke up despite sleeping in the chair. Her only concern was that her parents wouldn't have slept because they'd be scared of the neighbours attacking them, and so she thought that she would be in trouble for going to sleep. I told her that they'd gone to bed early and they were fine when they got up. She insisted it was because I was there and that they felt safer that way. I got talking to Megan about Courtney. Megan insisted I call her MJ instead of her full name because she didn't like it. I told her about the baby and the army, and before I knew it I was quite upset. I hadn't realised how much I'd needed to talk. It didn't matter who to, just that I had the opportunity to speak. I had no idea how much I'd actually locked away. MJ started to teach me how to use the internet, and we looked up facts online about childbirth and the whole process. Through what I knew about Courtney and the situation with the baby, and what I'd read online, I knew there was no way Courtney was ever pregnant. I already knew, of course, from what the good doctor had said, but still, the pain and self-doubt was a struggle. I told MJ the name of my child. It was the first time I'd spoken it to anyone bar Courtney, and I burst into another bout of tears. I cried for over an hour like a child, which had never existed. I was surprised I'd let go. It still hurt, but not as much as "you can't go back," Megan told me. "I can't stay," I replied. We talked all day about getting our own place. She had some savings and wanted us together no matter what her parents thought. I raised the issue about the neighbours and she blew up again, this time about her parents never standing up for themselves and expecting her to do everything. I didn't understand how she could go from wanting to protect her parents at all costs against these vile neighbours one minute, and the next hating her parents because they wouldn't stand up to them. She couldn't have it both ways. Her parents couldn't be both the aggressors and the victims. It just didn't work. And yet I put it down to her being controlled and angry. Then I ran with the options that worked out in my favour. "Well, if you're sure. Otherwise I will have to leave tonight," I said. "Tell me you love me, and I'll believe you," she said. I looked her dead in the eye. "I've been through so much. It wouldn't be fair to say that to you. But let's see how we go, yeah?" She agreed and prided my honesty. How could I know what love was? Any love I'd known involved pain. I knew they didn't belong together. I knew MJ, and I didn't either, but I felt I had little choice at the time. I felt totally useless, and I reacted as best I could to what situations were around me at the time. I'll admit I convinced myself on some level that I might actually be helping MJ, and that made me feel useful. I felt if I had any control in my life, and I was like Wenzel, a control freak. I felt if I did anything for myself, like buying a new jacket, that somehow I wasn't worth it. I felt if someone bought me something, it wasn't because I was a nice guy, it was because they wanted something. I'm not relieving myself of a responsibility. I'm explaining I hadn't been taught the simple processes of loving myself, and so I didn't. That aside, I knew exactly the choices I was making. I had zero self-worth. If someone had asked me if I wanted a brew, I would hear, make a brew. It was my job that I had to. That stood for everything, and if someone needed a cooker connected or I didn't know how, then I felt bad because it was my job to take care of people, and I couldn't. Just like I couldn't take care of Alan or my mum. This was mostly due to Wenzel's training, but the world of negative self-talk hadn't helped me much either. I just didn't realise at the time that that's actually what I'd been doing. It was late when Toby asked what time I had to go. MJ took the tickets from out of my hand and looked at me over the plastic candle. I nodded once and she ripped them in half. I'd had no decision to make. She'd taken all the responsibility from me and made it easy. I was grateful. I want him to stay. If not, we'll get a hotel until we get our own place, she said to Toby. Toby didn't say a word. He just shuffled off into the living room, presumably to talk to his wife. I didn't see them all night. I slept on the sofa with MJ. She tried to be intimate, but I told her I couldn't because it would be disrespectful to her parents. It wasn't true. The facts were simply I wasn't into her physically, and intimacy meant babies, and I wasn't going down that road. Not now and not ever. And that thought alone hurt me. I blamed myself for the death of a child, which hadn't lived. I was living at MJ's parents for about a week. Toby was actually okay when she got through his strange quietness, nor mention how obvious it was he was absolutely terrified of his wife. I looked at that I looked at that nice house one day with the beautiful garden, and what could have been a perfect family. I took it all in like a video camera, saving a minute worth of a clip as Toby pointed to a bird and told me the bird's name. I noted how pale and frail he was stood beside his little apple tree, and told myself in the sternest voice ever, whatever happens, don't turn out like him. And I felt truly sorry for him. The things he must have seen and felt powerless to do anything about, it showed physically, and I could feel the energy coming off him like those little bubbles you just can't get out of old shirts, and it itched me thinking about it. Who would believe him, beaten by his wife? Man enough never to hit her back, but scared and ashamed enough never to tell anyone. I took another mental snapshot and named it Don't Be Him, just to be certain it would remain in my head forever. How's it going? Toby asked me, as he looked for plane lines in the sky, and told me stories about when he was a postman who used to deliver to Bob Monkhouse. They were the only good memories he had. She's packing now, mate, I said. You won't lose her. I'll make sure we visit, I added. You're okay, he said, tapping my arm gently. But she won't let her. His eyes turned steely grey, and I felt all emotion leave him, and then he relaxed. Ah, it will be bad, he said, turning to his tree again. The neighbours? I asked, standing beside him, but out of hitting distance. He looked at me and held my gaze a moment like I knew nothing, and then looked back. I'd caught the meaning. Not bad for us. Bad for me. She'll have me doing everything again. He didn't need to say it. My sympathy for him was immediately gone. No man worth his salt would put his daughter in place of an abusive position he'd once been in, no matter how scared he was. MJ and I were packing the car. I told her to give them a hug and tell them she loves them before she left. She explained they don't do that and they never have. It'll make a change then, I said, insisting they left on good terms. MJ was in there nearly 20 minutes before the front door opened and then closed again. Something wasn't right. I headed towards the front door as her neighbours came out. A young couple, both clean-cut, medium build. He was fair-haired and confident. She less so, with black hair, but still confident, just not as much as him. He saw me. "Morning," I said out of habit. He nodded and got in the car. The woman gave him a "Who's that?" look. They seemed fine to me. Apparently they were violent, but I picked up nothing. MJ had been telling me they had the roof window open and were constantly throwing bottles out of it. but the garden was tidy. There was a little bit of grass down both sides, was also tidy. "Yes, I am, you don't own me," MJ was shouting from the other side of the door. "I bloody well do. I brought you into this world, bitch." I slammed my hand 5 times hard on the door. "I'll give you seconds to come out or I'm kicking the door in," I said loud enough but calmly. If it came to it, I stood no chance. The door was solid wood. It was thick, but it had shocked them into silence. No violence around the new guy. I'd seen the living room window open previously around the back. If push came to shove, I'd hop through that. 4, 3, 2, I shouted as the door opened. I placed my foot in it and stepped forwards. Hope was in the doorway with Toby behind her, and MJ was curled up at the bottom of the stairs holding her face. "Thanks for having me," I said, not making eye contact with her, and pushing past her like she didn't exist. She was gobbing off at Tony, who stepped in front of me at his wife's comment. I stood stock still with my arms by my side. "Move," I said gently. He didn't. It was time to try a different tack. "MJ, get up, it's time to go." She did, and I took her hand and pulled her towards the door. Hope had closed it and tried to grab MJ. I opened the door and waved her away as I walked out. MJ took the lead and got into the car. I walked slowly, purely out of ego. I wasn't going to fight with anyone, but sure as hell wasn't going to go running away either. Running was Wenzel's job. At that moment, when I was nearly out of the drive, Toby grabbed my sleeve. I lifted my arm high above my head and sidestepped, so he now had his back to me, but he was looking at me and still had hold of my sleeve. "Seriously?" I asked him. He knew he stood no chance and released me. I got in the car and gave Hope a wave as we left. I had no idea where we were going. We stayed at a bed and breakfast for a week and went to tell the housing office we were homeless. Apparently we needed a letter to say MJ had been thrown out. The parents said she hadn't been and was welcomed home any time. I went back to MJ's parents and negotiated to deal with them. I'd pop round and do the garden for them when needed once a week, and MJ and I would come and do their shopping, drop it off and tidy the home. They agreed to do the letter. When we returned to pick the letter up, it said that MJ wasn't welcome home anymore because she was sick and tired of her violence. She'd become unmanageable due to her numerous mental health problems. As far as they were concerned, she didn't exist. I calmed MJ down. I didn't like their tactics, but fuck it, it was in fact a win for us. We got the letter. I had no idea how true their wording would actually turn out to be. I wish I'd kept that damn letter. I really do. We'd moved to a cheaper bed and breakfast, and money was running out fast. MJ made a call, and next minute we were offered a place to stay. Apparently her friend Paul was going away, and the flat would be free. Could we look after it? Well, hell yeah. It was an okay block of flats with only 6 flats in the whole building, and we were in the middle on the right hand side with a fenced off field beside us. The area seemed nice. It was in Beckenham, which wasn't far away from where we were before, and MJ said she'd known him a few years and so trusted him, but that he had a secret he didn't want anyone to know about, so sometimes he acted a bit strange. I said if she trusted him it was good enough for me. We kept him in the living room and a week flew by. Unfortunately the housing were no closer to getting us accommodated, so there was nothing we could do apart from sit tight. We agreed to pay his electric bill and some towards his rent, but relying just on MJ's benefit money, which back then had to be claimed on a paper book, was getting more and more difficult. It was so bad I called my social worker and asked for money. He told me I wasn't on a care order anymore and he couldn't help me. However, a couple of hours later £65 appeared in my account. I sent him a text saying thank you, and I meant it. He saved us from being homeless that day. MJ said we had less and less money, but I knew from the receipts it wasn't accurate. I suspected Paul was stealing from us, but I couldn't prove it. It was around this time the problems really started. I used MJ's computer to write up a CV. I didn't have much experience, but it wasn't the worst idea in the world. However, when I showed MJ, she started treating me like I didn't care about her at all. You'd leave me with a strange man on my own in a strange place. I hadn't thought about it like that at all. I simply wanted to make some money instead of living off MJ. You do know I have anxiety, don't you? How do you think my anxiety is going to be if you're not fucking here? She stormed. She was screaming in my face as I stepped back. I'll admit I was a little scared. I didn't know how to react to her. I was over 100 miles from anywhere I knew, and in my mind I'd just caused this woman an immense amount of stress because I got myself involved in her life, then indicated I'd walk away from her. Besides, if I couldn't help her, they'd never have been able to help my mum, would I? They were both agoraphobic. I had to, whatever the cost. I'm sorry, I didn't realise. I wasn't thinking properly, I was just trying to help, I said. You want to help? She said. Inside a week, I was signed off as her carer, and she showed me how to make applications for income support, low-rate disability living allowance because of my recurrent dislocative shoulder. After all, if I couldn't lift, I couldn't work. I was amazed by how simple the process was. We had to talk to the doctor a few times, who apparently MJ had a way with. He signed me off sick every 4 weeks for 3 months with no questions. And the questions just needed a sick note every 6 months. It was horrible. I wanted to work, and in reality I wasn't claiming anything I wasn't entitled to. In reality I wasn't claiming anything I wasn't entitled to. I did have the conditions raised in the claim, and I was caring for someone who was essentially disabled due to her morbid obesity. Often routine things became difficult, and I felt guilty to the world because I wanted to work and I was capable of it, and I felt awful to me because it reinforced how useless I actually was. I'd been out to Sainsbury's shopping for MJ. She didn't feel up to driving, even though the flat was literally 5 minutes walk to the supermarket. So I'd walked it along, carried lots of bags home. Paul was home with MJ, although he wasn't due back until the evening. "Okay, mate," I asked, putting the bags down near his kitchen. He didn't answer. "Has MJ paid the rent yet, mate?" I'd motioned towards the bags and indicated that we'd been paid today. "Yeah, it's good. MJ paid me, but I could use electric money," he said. "Here you go," I said, bunging him a tenner. I told MJ later on that I'd given it to him. She informed me she paid him a tenner this morning before he went out. We agreed to pay him only set amounts and to get out of his place as quick as possible, even if it meant borrowing money to go private. I'd written notes all my life. I'd come to London with 2 notepads, one with my telephone numbers in, and one I'd written what I'd call notes down on. There were generally a few lines here and there about people or things I'd seen. Both of them were missing, so I knocked on next door to ask the guy there if he'd seen them in the hall. Perhaps I'd dropped them on the way in. We got talking and he invited me in for a coffee. It was very dark and the curtains were drawn. It was quite cold, but I had a coffee and a chat with the thin fellow who told me his name was Franklin. He wore blue trousers and a cotton shirt. He was clean-shaven and looked to be around 50 years old. He rocked when he spoke and routinely rang his fingers together. The ashtray was full to overflowing with fag butts. He seemed a nice enough guy, just lonely. But again, as was becoming routine, something wasn't right. I told him my story from Manchester to now, and he told me I was right to be wary of Paul. Paul often borrows money for his gran, and he has never paid Franklin back. MJ and I cleaned every inch of Paul's flat looking for my notebooks, all apart from Paul's bedroom, as he asked us never to go in there. "Fuck it, that's the last place left," I told her. I opened the door. He had a single bed, a desk with a computer on it, and 3 teddy bears on his bed. The rest of the room was littered with clothes and books. Paul was 27 years old, thin with dark hair and vaguely resembled the weasel. I tripped on a karate book next to the bed on the way in and started folding clothes. I found my notebook underneath his pillows. When he got home, I told him I'd tidied his room and he looked at me ashen. "Found my notebooks too, under your pillows next to your teddy bears," I added. "Oh, that's great," he said. "That's it? That's all you got to say?" I asked calmly. "Well, I don't know how they got there. I don't read. I'm dyslexic," he said. I laughed. "There's books in your room. You taught MJ how to use a PC. You're not dyslexic," I said gently. I wanted him to feel bad, but I didn't want to push it over the top. We were staying in his home after all. "I don't know why they were there, honest. Look, I don't care about your personal shit, mate." He started bobbing from foot to foot. He was anxious, but getting like he could start to have a go as well. "I look at pictures in books. I can't read," he said, shaking his head at me like it was my fault. "Fuck it. Okay, well, I appreciate you letting us stay, and we are paying most of your bills. But I'm telling you now, touch my stuff again, I'll drop you where you stand. Clear?" I said. I was still seated. I was level-toned. He immediately raised his voice. "I can't read. Tell him, MJ. Shit, I let you stay here and you accuse me of..." I was up and stepping forward. He leaned back and started walking backwards. I followed him like this until his back hit his wardrobe in his bedroom, and then he went silent. Nice and simple. My shit goes missing. You get hurt. Right? This time I changed my tone to sound like a horrible bastard. No, we're good. I have stuff to do though, if you don't mind," he said, looking at the floor. I stepped out of his bedroom. MJ was waiting for me in the hall and watching everything. "That went better than I thought it would," I said, not knowing if that severely helped or severely screwed up. Chapter 25. The atmosphere was becoming somewhat strained when Paul was around, until one day he just walked into the living room and said, "He knows, doesn't he? That's why he looks at me like strange." I was pretending to be asleep on the sofa, as I had enough of playing cards with MJ and trying to kill time until we got our own place. "No, I've not told him anything," she said, while sat on the floor. "Well, he knows something," Paul commented as I sat up. "Sup?" I asked, making a show of rubbing my eyes and stretching. Paul made some excuse to go and went for a bath. As soon as he was gone, I turned to MJ. "What's the big secret? What is it I'm supposed to know that I don't?" "Promise me you won't say anything," she said. "No, okay," I shrugged, making a roll-up. "Paul did time," she said. I laughed. "My uncle did time. My other uncle did time. My father did time. What's the big deal? Besides, he doesn't seem the type. He's kind of slimy. He doesn't look like he's got it in him, to be honest," I said. "He likes children," she said, looking straight at me. I have to say I had suspected he was a bit weird when I saw the teddy bears, but I figured he was just insecure as hell. I'd never have guessed he was into kids. "That's not a small accusation, MJ. How do you know?" I said. "Told me himself," she said, and I believed her. "I've been thinking, what if I go to college? Not a job, just college, so I'll still be able to help with travel, just not all the time. And then I can work from home maybe. Then we can get enough money to leave," I said. "Go to college with no address and no money," she replied, mimicking my voice. She had a point, but I suspected it was more because she didn't want to be left alone. I was starting to feel like all my choices were being shouted down, or that they were just impossible. Paul was asking for money again. It must be around winter now, because I remember it was cold and grey. We gave him what little we had left and went for a walk. A group of 3 girls stopped us as we went round the corner into a little off-the-track pathway. "Hey, you live with Paul, don't you?" They were school age. "Yeah, what's up?" I asked. We got chatting. It became apparent they used to go to his place to smoke and chat until we moved in, and now they can't. Paul had told them that I accused him of stealing, and that I'd hit him, so now he's trying to find a way to get rid of us. I thanked the girls and walked back to the flat. MJ had gone and sat in a car. I rang the intercom. "Hey Paul, just bumped into some girls who tell me you want us out. Can we have a chat, mate? I left my keys with MJ, I said nicely. "I haven't said anything about you yet," he said, laughing. It surprised me, but it didn't bother me. What did bother me was the sound of a younger male in the background laughing too. I'm going to have him, I thought. I went back to MJ in the car, told her not to worry about it. We'd go for a walk in the park and everything would become clearer. We were there about an hour, when who comes walking down the alley towards us, but Paul, and a lad no older than 12. I'd had enough and something just snapped. "Stay out of my way," I said deadpan, and removed my hand from MJ's grasp. "What?" she asked, looking at me but still walking. We were nearer to Paul now. "Just do it," I told her as Paul and the boy approached. "Hi Paul," I said, throwing my arms out wide and lifting my head up and backwards. I smiled, looking like I was really pleased to see him. The boy was smart and moved a good 2 feet away from Paul as soon as I threw my arms outwards. Paul mirrored me and lifted his head and smiled as his greasy black hair shone in the small amount of sunlight. I flicked my hips and hooked him along the side of his jaw. His head snapped around and he fell like a sack of shit holding it. The younger lad had legged it, and Paul just lay there rolling round and holding his jaw. "Right, dickhead," I said, leaning down. "We'll leave as soon as we can. That was a fucking tap. If you lie about me, this is what happens. Now you can tell people I really did hit you." I kicked him in the gut and walked back to his flat. On the way I passed the group of girls. "Alright love, Paul's got a new story for you. This time I did hit him." "Why do you want to hang out with scum like him?" "Come on, seriously," I asked them. "He's got a place," one of them said. "You can do better," I told them. I gave Franklin a knock and told him MJ and I were off. We were going to stay in the car near our parents until something came up. Franklin invited us in, said he was going to Spain in a couple of weeks with his mum, Paula. Would we keep an eye on the flat? Naturally, we said yes. 3 days in, and we'd been invited to meet Franklin's mum. She lived local and rented out 2 of her bedrooms to teenagers from broken homes. She had 2 massive dogs, and she was nearly 6 feet tall, with gorgeous long blonde hair almost hitting her ankles. She used to bring tobacco and cigarettes back from Spain for everyone. And she was 80. She'd had more operations than anyone I knew, and I loved listening to her talk, because it was like every part of her life she described like a beautiful adventure. She ate well and kept busy, and in return she said she had no mobility issues at all. She was a legend, and praised us for looking after her boy, who she said was schizophrenic. I'd heard of it, but I wasn't overly familiar. I had to get MJ to look it up on the internet. Apparently, as long as Franklin didn't drink alcohol, he took his medication regularly, then he was fine. She told it us jovially, but don't hesitate to call me if there's a real problem. I'll get him sectioned again. She was laughing like it was just run of the mill. I was starting to think the entire world was crazy. I really liked Paula. I had a ton of respect for her. Oh, and don't let that Paul lad borrow anything. He's a naughty one, that one, she said. Don't think you need to worry about that for a while. Doesn't like me much, I told her. Franklin had no problems that week. Went away with his mum to Spain. MJ seemed to calm down a lot now she had some semblance of normality around her. We even visited her parents to do the shopping and sort the garden as promised. We thought it might help to show we stuck to our end of the bargain. Hope never spoke to me, or I to her the entire time I was there. I spoke to Toby, but we'd never be friends. When we'd done, we returned to Franklin's flat, and Paul's door was wide open. "You broke his jaw," one of the girls said, laughing, amongst the noise of several other children in his flat. Paul closed the door, and I heard the lock click. "How do we stop him having children over?" I asked MJ. "Leave it. The police can't stop him having kids there," she said. "I can, though," I answered, without thinking. "How?" she asked. "Dunno. Can't sling them out, but there has to be a way," I said. I wasn't happy. It was starting to churn me up that just across the hall was someone potentially messing around with children in a bad way. Somehow he was probably doing what happened to my sister, or to my mum, and I was sat doing nothing about it, like Wenzel had done nothing about it. I was up most of the night, so I didn't wake up until gone 10 AM the following day. Then it hit me. "I've got an idea, give me some notes," I said. "What?" she asked. "I've got an idea, I'll give them back in a minute." She handed me 30 quid, and I slipped some jeans on and opened the front door. I walked across the hall and knocked onto Paul's door. I had my wallet open with notes sticking out visible. He opened the door a hair's width. "Hi mate, I wanted to say thanks for putting us up. Is it just you in?" I asked, looking around the hall and back to my notes again repeatedly. It stank of sweat, and he had a bathrobe and boxers on. "Yeah," he said. "Well, come in," I said, moving the money like I wanted nobody to see it. He stepped back. "How's it going?" I said, shutting the door behind me. "Yeah, it's alright, I'll be a minute," he said, running to turn the porn off he'd left on. There was a knife on the kitchen side. I grabbed it and chucked it in the fridge. I didn't want him grabbing it. "So," he asked, looking at me and wondering why my wallet was back in my pocket. "Girls say I broke your jaw," I asked. "Well, yeah, I went to hospital and everything. Dislocated, they said." "Not fucking broke then, is it?" I said, turning Mr. Nasty on him and leaning forwards. I jabbed his face and landed a hard right. "Dirty fucking nonce," I said, hooking his ribs hard with each word as he tried to push me away. Left first, then right. The wind went out of him. He tried to curl up on the floor as I hooked his face. He leaned against the cupboard door, clutching his stomach. His head rattled against the door, and then he hit the floor as I hit him. I wasn't done. I knelt down beside him. "No kids in the fucking flat," I said, hitting him hard as I could with each word. I gave him a good few whacks out of pure anger, which he probably didn't deserve, but he got them anyway. He was conscious, but he was not fighting to curl up. He wanted to move out of the way, but you could tell his body wouldn't let him. When I'd done, I took a pack of 50-gram pouch of tobacco off the side, and told him that's for all the extra cash you had. I opened the front door, making sure to let out a cheerful "Thanks Paul, see you later mate," for anyone who was listening. I told MJ Paul was very apologetic about taking so much money, and insisted that we took the tobacco as a gift. Franklin had been home perhaps 4 days and kept himself hidden away to the living room. When he did invite me in, he was in the corner of the living room with cans all around him. We'd been to our mother's and done a shopping run for ourselves too. "You okay, mate?" I asked him as he was sat in the middle of a big leather sofa. He looked so helpless, leaning over a smoky ashtray. The curtains were closed again. I figured it gave him comfort. "Yep, you drink to drunk, Tracy?" he asked me. Then he threw his arms out and hugged me tightly. "Drink to drunk with me, Tracy," he said, pronouncing my name with a W to make Twacy. "I don't drink, mate. Thanks for the offer, though," I said, taking the can of Foster's he passed me and putting it back on his table. "You had your pills, boss?" I asked him. "Oh, go on," he said, smiling. I took a sip, I told him I had to pee, and then I'd join him. NJ put the shopping away while I emptied my can down the toilet and refilled it with tap water. Good stuff this, mate, I said while I returned and made sure taking a big swig. How many you had? I asked, wondering why the tap water was so different to the luxury of northern water. Couple, maybe, he said, pointing to an empty bottle of wine, at least 7 cans. I waited until he slept and then I called his mum. She explained she wasn't worried unless he started hurting himself. Apparently it's only then he becomes a danger. If he's not hitting himself, it's not a problem. It's just a drink habit. I took her word for it and left Franklin to count sheep. Franklin was very apologetic when he woke up. No worries, mate, you had a drink. So what? Forget about it, relax, I said. Which he did, with another can of lager, for breakfast. That's when alarm bells started to go off. How did he afford it? He doesn't work. Beautiful leather sofa, oak table, huge TV, nice cabinet, just been to Spain with his mum, and the flat was owned outright. He always had smokes, and had got through at least 30 quid's worth of alcohol last night alone. MJ and I decided as long as he was just getting drunk and not acting like a knob, we'd let him get on with it. It's his flat, it's his life after all. We were both concerned about him and checked on him frequently during the next few days of his binge. His mum came round daily too. It was always the same advice. Make sure he eats 1 meal a day and that he's taking his pills. If it escalates, then call me. I think her heart was in the right place, but she was also somehow grateful that the burden was off her. It wasn't helping me much though. MJ now had more reason to believe she couldn't be in the flat alone, or with Franklin, and so I couldn't go out without her having a go at me or saying she was having panic attacks. In no time at all, MJ got to the point where she didn't want to leave the bedroom, which Franklin had kindly given us when we moved in. I needed to see if I could help for my sake, as much as everyone else's. Morning, mate, let's see if we can get some air in here, shall we? I said, opening the curtains. Franklin looked at me like I'd hit him. You okay, mate? Hangover? Get some mineral water down you. I laughed, trying to sidetrack why he was looking at me so cautiously. Close 'em! Close 'em! He waved, sliding down onto the floor and flapping his arms around. He sat cross-legged on the floor, waving his arms up and down. Close 'em! I closed the curtains and checked the street outside as I did. It was empty. I checked the windows opposite our flat and they were all clear and normal. What's up, mate? I asked Franklin as I sat next to him on the floor. They'll get me, all of them. He gestured with his arms out wide. Who, mate? I asked him. Them! They had me, I know. Oh, ignore me, Tracy. He tapped the side of his head with his fingers. It's okay, mate. I know. Your mum told me, I reassured him. You think I'm crazy? He asked. Crazy? No, mate. You just need to relax. There's nobody outside, you know, I told him. This went on well into the evening. He was constantly feeling watched. He refused to take his pills, but he was still drinking. He'd go out in his Jeep just fine, as long as it was to buy more alcohol. When he came back, I had a long chat to him about drinking and driving, but it went straight over his head. I cared about Franklin. He played the victim really well. I'm fine, Tracy. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. You still like me, don't you, Tracy? He'd say, throwing his arms wide and smiling like he wanted to hug me. He had a friendly face. It was like talking to a child, even though Franklin knew what he was doing. I watched a film he'd put on. I don't remember what it was called, but I know it was a horror film, because it got towards night time and MJ and I hadn't slept well in days. We were worried about Franklin, and we were chasing places from newspapers to try and find a place to live during the day. It was around 10 PM when we heard the microwave door open, and then the cutlery drawer go. I thought nothing of it, until I heard the clattering. You okay, mate? I said, jumping out of bed, dressed in my jeans and nakedness. MJ and my relationship had progressed physically, but for the most part I still wasn't comfortable with her. It was over quickly out of choice, and left me feeling as though I'd helped her feel better about herself, but I felt nothing for her. She'll kill me, wants me dead, hides all the time, he said, chucking another handful of knives and forks in the microwave. I unplugged it when his hand was back in the drawer and he was too drunk to notice. Who is, mate? It's late, I asked, hoping he wasn't going to say MJ. Oh, you know, Tracy, you know, you're my friend, aren't you, Tracy? He asked me. Yes, mate, always, but this is dangerous. Should we put them back in the cupboard instead? I asked him. I didn't dare try and move anything in case he flipped out. No, Tracy, no, she'll kill me. You be careful now, you don't know, he said. I was calm but cautious. He was playing with knives. I liked him, but I didn't know if he'd hurt himself. I remembered Paula's words. but if he came at me with a knife, I was dropping him, whether he had a condition or not. "Who wants to hurt you, Franklin? Tell me, my friend," I offered. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if to trust me or not. I pretended I was Nigel, and smiled hugely and just looked at him with all the care I could muster. I held his gaze for as long as I could, which wasn't hard, because as long as he stood looking at me, he wasn't dicking around with knives. "MJ, she wants me dead. She hates me," he said, full of honesty. "Oh, Franklin, MJ doesn't want you dead. MJ really likes you. Would you like to say hello?" "Come on, she'd like that," I said. I touched his arm gently. "I won't force you, mate. It's up to you. But she'd really like a good catch-up," I said, turning away and heading back to the bedroom. Luckily it worked, and Franklin followed me. "No, Tracy, don't disturb her. It's just me," he said, tapping his head hard. "Don't be silly, she'd love it," I said, opening the bedroom door and kicking myself for telling him not to be silly. Now he'd think that I think he's silly. MJ was sat up in bed. "Franklin wants to say hello." I told him we'd love that. "Okay," I said. She was pretending to be groggy. Yeah, okay," she said. I sat on the floor with Franklin and got MJ and Franklin talking. Then I made my excuses to go to the loo. I covered the kitchen. First all the sharps went into the bin bag, including the forks, and then I rolled it up and put it on top of the kitchen units. There I went in the living room and bagged up his empty cans and bottles, where I found a penknife and one of the drawers in the living room, which immediately went in my pocket. I then went to the loo and returned to the bedroom. Franklin was sat cross-legged on the floor, sipping a Carlsberg and rocking back and forwards. He was fighting his own demons. I wanted so much to be able to help him. "How does it work, Franklin? Don't mind me asking?" Through slow slurs one minute and rapid speech with elaborative hand gestures the next. He told me he used to be big and strong. He worked on the railways and he earned good money. Then one day when he was in his early 20s, he just knew he should leave and go walking. He remembers going for a walk, but his next memory is of being near Wales on a motorway with a full beard and dirty clothes. He'd been arrested and taken to hospital, where he was diagnosed over time with several different disorders, none of which were schizophrenia. The memory lapses would happen a lot, and eventually he lost his job. "I was hearing them and feeling them, but I was too scared to say," he told me in a clear voice which didn't sound as natural as he ever did. He glanced behind him. "Do you think I'm crazy, Tracy?" "No, mate," I answered for the 100th time that night, as I remembered telling Graham I never wanted to hear them because it was too real. A thought dawned on me. "Many people do, though. Why don't you?" he asked me. You're not the illness, and so it wasn't his fault, because it's just an illness," I said. Franklin went on to fill in the rest of his story. "They said I broke shop windows. I don't remember." He went on whilst I tuned into him. MJ had made herself busy with an internet chat room. I had not tuned into anyone since Graham. I could feel Franklin's agitation, like he constantly had someone with him, even when well. The person hated him, and told him daily how bad he was, how unliked, and all the bad things that could happen to him. I extended my energy, focusing just around Franklin instead of on him. Beneath the surface of calm and friendly demeanour, Franklin hadn't learnt it was okay to have negative thoughts, and so in turn he'd always beaten himself up for thinking anything negative. He couldn't accept that sometimes we just have these feelings, it was normal, we just weren't to act on them. He'd pushed them out so much, he'd given them an identity. Over time, that identity became so real and so external to him, it was as real as you or I, and totally independent. Most of all, it didn't actually exist anywhere apart from in his head, and so he was constantly alone with it. This was no spirit I was dealing with, or rather, Franklin was dealing with. The chemicals the doctors gave him could slow his brain and subdue his thoughts. They could increase the feelings of euphoria. They could even stop him being able to connect to his identity. They just couldn't stop the identity existing in the first place. And so the second he stopped taking the pills, he reconnected with his negative self. Of course, when taking the pills, Franklin felt well, and so felt he didn't need them anymore. And as soon as he stopped taking them, the voices came back and he drank to get rid of them. "At least the juice tells no lies," he'd tell me. "It's a lesser demon, you know," he asked, wagging a finger at me, and holding half-tilted can of Carlsberg. That's the end of chapter 25. So, Franklin was absolutely awesome. And I'm not going to fill in blanks for the rest of the story, but honestly, he was one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. He is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. When his condition wasn't tormenting him, and when he was taking his medication and not drinking. A really, really lovely bloke, a gentle giant, and when I knew him then, a thin ghost of a man who had shown me a picture previously where he was a really big, well built, strong, sturdy, healthy looking bloke. Yeah, I'd even go as far as to say that when he was not under the influence, he was somebody I'd miss. He was okay. And when people have schizophrenia, generally they think, oh, he's a wacko, he's crazy, or he's this. You know, not all schizophrenia works like that. I did my research years later, and you know, there's a lot of people that are schizophrenic that don't have the tendencies that Franklin had, and there's a lot of people that are schizophrenic that have a lot of worse tendencies, and you'll hear worse, unfortunately, in the next couple of chapters. But I wanted to advertise Nigel's exhibition in this episode because it's relevant. I'd already written this before I knew about his exhibition, and it's relevant because whenever I have sat there as a man, and that's what we do as a bloke, we sit there and go, okay, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix that. It's like, I'll do the wallpaper, I'll do the gardening, I'll do the this and that and the other, I'll do the architrave, and you know, that's what we do with emotions. Generally speaking, somebody sits down and goes, you know, I've got this problem, and our first thought is I'll fix it. Our first thought is I'll give them 20 ways to fix it. Sometimes that doesn't fix it. Sometimes that's not the way it works, and a lot of relationships have problems because the guy's first thought is I'll fix it. And because the flip side of that is women don't understand that, generally speaking, the guy's first thought is I'm going to fix it, and they just want to talk. And you know what? Sometimes we just want to talk as well. And so communication can be absolutely paramount. Nigel taught me this when I must have been 11, 12, 13, somewhere around that bracket. My mum had been killed, I'd been mute for ages. I had the leading psychotherapist on when father kills mother, homicide, on my case. She was a lovely woman, but I had no interest in talking to her. I had two NSPCC workers. One was a brilliant lady and the other guy was a complete dickhead. And if you're out there, just so as you know, you're probably still a complete dickhead. And I had no interest in really talking to either of them. I mean, the bird was cute, but that's a story for another day. You've probably read about that in Tracy's story. But the point I'm getting at is nobody could get through to me. Nobody could help me get through to me until Nigel. And he sat there and he looked at me dead in the eye with a big smile on his face, like he wanted nothing more than to listen and to understand. That's it. To listen and to understand. And sometimes that's all we need. And he gave me time and time again to do that. And I didn't speak. I had sessions where I sat there for an hour and said nothing. I had sessions where I sat there for an hour and I wrote or I draw or whatever, but I didn't speak. I'd just nod my head or shake my head or not reply. Until eventually one day I said, this is my uncle, and I explained about my uncle, and I went into detail, and I've covered that in Tracy's story. That was the start of me talking, the start of me communicating, the start of me writing. I knew there was some spark of life that was going to continue when I beat the living shit out of that clay figure and my uncle, that metamorphosed into my father, that went into all sorts of things because of this art therapy. I knew when I got that little cut on the base of my hand on the right, just below my little finger, I knew then when I released all that, that something was going to be birthed from this, and I didn't know what, but I knew I was going to use that anger, that pain, that torment, that guilt, and that one day something would happen. I never knew what until about 12 years ago. That's a story you'll find later. But you know what? Yes, I praise my achievements, praise my abilities and everything I've come through. But it's people like Nigel, it's people like another therapist you'll encounter later on. I can't remember the name I've actually used for her in the book right now, but you will encounter her later on. It's people like Nigel and it's people like her that gave me the tools to be able to be who I am and where I am today. As for Paul, I am not proud of the things that happened, and if I knew that that gentleman was that way inclined, I would not have stepped foot in that property. And I was in a rather delicate situation, but yeah, I don't know what happened to that guy. I hope somewhere there was a tragic accident involved, but I don't like people like that. I don't like liars. I don't like cheats. I don't like people that hurt kids. But I don't like that. I don't like that one little bit. So until next time, go and see Nigel's exhibition because it's fucking awesome. And take care of yourselves and each other. And if you have obviously any concerns about my vulgar language, my swearing, my horrible demeanour, don't really give a shit. It's my podcast, so off you go. Enjoy yourself. Leave me a review. I'm awesome. Goodbye.